So happy to introduce our third presentation, which is entitled Researcher Positionality and Personalized Learning. And let's welcome Rebecca Wolfe and Eric Toshalis from KnowledgeWorks.
Fantastic. Hi, everybody. So it's been a headful and thoughtful morning so far. So I want to invite you, if you've started to kind of feel your energy kind of draining into the Zoom land, maybe put your camera on if you've had it off, maybe turn it off if you've had it on, and just take a moment to kind of wave to everybody. And as you're waving, maybe turn it into a little bit of a stretch, maybe a little bit of an arms out. So many good friends on this call, so many exciting researchers and projects. So just get your blood flowing a little bit more beyond the end of our last presentation before we go into some great breakout groups. So yes, hello, I'm Rebecca Wolfe, Vice President at Impact and Improvement. I'm joined by my colleague, Eric Toshalis, Senior Director of Impact and Improvement. And in some ways, we are going to kind of take us full circle back to where Dr. Gilliam Joe started. So you just heard two really thick, meaty, juicy presentations on specific studies. Eric and I are going to pull back a little bit and talk about, we'll touch on some of the work that we've been doing, examples, but really we're going to be focusing on this theme, as Elliot said, of democratizing research and foregrounding positionality and responsive investigations. Lots of awesome, lovely words that we're going to try to unpack a little bit more. Next slide, please. So KnowledgeWorks, if those of you on the call don't know us, we're a nonprofit who focuses on evidence-based practices and a commitment to equitable outcomes, creating the future of learning together. So lots of good stuff underneath each one of those phrases. And rather than spend time on it now, I'm going to go on to the next slide. We're just celebrated our 20th birthday party, sadly, remotely, like everybody else. So what do we mean when we say democratizing research? In short, while we focus on rigorous research, robust research, pick your favorite R word with research, at the end of the day, if we want it to be transformative, if we want it to be decentralized, decentering whiteness, if we want it to be creating the change for the people that at KnowledgeWorks we focus the most on, then we have to be thinking about research in a way that is responsive to the end users. So we launched the Student-Centered Learning Research Collaborative in 2015, back when Eric and I were still at Jobs for the Future. We moved the work over to KnowledgeWorks about 18 months ago. And in this time, we have tried a lot of different ways, methods, approaches to trying to figure out, what do we actually mean when we say democratizing research? What does that look like? What do we need to do? We have made a lot of mistakes. If you come to the breakout group, we're happy to share more about those mistakes. But really what we're trying to do today is set up just kind of a high-level framework of what we have found works. And then we want to hopefully go a little bit deeper with you. We're happy to answer questions in the breakout, both about the specific projects we're going to talk about, but even more, we are really interested in hearing from folks on this call, because you have all been working in this field for quite some time, and we know you have a lot to bring in terms of how you have tried to build responsive investigations, what that looked like, what you've tried. So I'm going to kick it to Eric just to tell us a little bit more about, again, what the Student-Centered Learning Collaborative is about, and then we'll unpack the framework a little bit more. Next slide, and Eric.
Good morning, everyone. Psyched to see so many friends, colleagues, and folks on this call, and to hear the kinds of things that we're talking about today lifted up across the work here. What I'm going to briefly describe is what we've set up in the Student-Centered Learning Research Collaborative, originally incubated at Jobs for the Future, and now finding its home in KnowledgeWorks. We throughout have created an equity focus by looking at approaches and systemic features that we can depend on to produce disproportionately positive impacts on marginalized learners. And I want to say that phrase again, disproportionately positive impacts on marginalized learners. We're intentional about that because the rising tide lifting all boats just preserves the gaps and opportunities that we already know exist when students come into our learning spaces. And if we aren't seeing and aren't designing those studies and implementations that seek to reduce those gaps, we're actually part of the problem. So disproportionately positive impacts on our most marginalized learners. And to do that, we have 4 focuses in the Research Collaborative: to catalyze, connect, communicate, continually improve, and we love alliteration. I challenge people to alliterate more than we do. First one is catalyze. This is where we're trying to find the edges of the field and expand the evidence base so that more and more knowledge is discovered and then used to advance equity in the field. We connect by breaking down silos, by setting tables, by pushing conversations, by decentering dominant voices, and by reducing redundancy in the field. We communicate by translating findings for audiences who are positioned to do something with those findings, to enact them, to put them into place, to refine them, to critique them. It's not just that we produce and put into journals, although, yay, I've published in journals, many of you have published journals, good stuff, but doesn't filter to the places where we can produce some of the most important change. And the last part is continuous improvement. We're continually improving and helping systems and schools to do the same by basically staying curious and critical about our work and being open to be held accountable when we're not doing it well enough. Next slide, please.
So to sort of pull together some of our lessons learned, both hard ways and good ways, and how do we think about incorporating community voice, it really comes down to these 3 kind of areas: process, methods, building skills, and amplifying voice. So process matters. So we have really tried to build into the upfront thinking of our research studies questions such as: who is doing the research? Research positionality. How are the research questions themselves constructed? Who influences the design? And we've folded that into projects such as REMIX, which stands for Robust and Equitable Measures to Inspire Quality Schools. So we have, before we even started collecting data, we have looked at how we are going to build, how we are going to ultimately research back. Methods matter. So we've already about different kinds of studies. Dr. Joe presented a very compelling case around how we start pulling together, thinking differently about qualitative, quantitative. We couldn't and we have really started to hone in both in the work that we're doing in research and also general R&D projects on research. If that's not meta enough for you, I don't know what is, but what are the kinds of methods that are the most set up from the start to incorporate community voice? So again, rather than kind of building it at the end, thinking about the methods that we use. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about how we've tried to build skills and amplify voice. So one of the best things that we've heard this morning, and also we think about all the time in the Research Collaborative, is getting out of the way. It's not a matter of we give you voice, it's a matter of figuring out how do we get out of the way, how do we set tables, how do we make sure that we're sharing enough language so that both researchers and impacted communities are hearing each other. So we'll talk a little bit about how we're making sure that we can amplify voices that are already there and build those skills. Next slide, please.
I just put in the chat a link to an article where we characterize this next piece here, and it's about positionality and positioning, again with the alliteration. The decentering approach that we take is to continually ask who's at the table when the designs of our studies are hatched, who's at the table when that work is undertaken, who's undertaken when the meaning is made of those findings, and who's at the table when you make decisions about what that looks like in implementation. We have been and continue to be committed to using the insights from research about positionality, namely the work of Dr. Rich Milner at Vanderbilt. His 2007 piece that I will put in the chat right here, right now, has a fantastic explication of how positionality needs to be understood to make sure that we prioritize those who have the life experiences and expertise to recognize and address systemic oppression that operates in and through education. If those folks aren't at the table critical. If we're not doing that hard work with each other across difference and with a critical lens, with a critical anti-racist lens, if we're going to center race, then we're actually starting out from the wrong position and are likely going to be heading in the wrong direction. Therefore, putting positionality at the front of our work and making sure that we have specific moves to prioritize it has been critical. Second to that, we, in our new Remix project, or not so much new anymore, we're deep into the work right now, we are in the process of forming a stakeholder committee. Stakeholder committee includes members of impacted families, community leaders who are working in the education reform space, employers who have a vested interest in the outcomes of secondary education, and representatives from institutes of higher education, because those folks too have a vested interest in what happens after kids graduate. Those folks are all from marginalized backgrounds: Black, Brown, Indigenous, immigrant, English learners, low income, but they possess learning differences or identify as LGBTQ+. When those folks come together, once we've activated that committee, they will be informing the schools that we choose to investigate, what we look for, how we look at those things, the way we communicate findings, how we make meaning of them, and all of our communications campaigns. And we look forward to sharing the design of that stakeholder committee and how it's implemented in the months ahead. Thank you.
All right, 1 more minute per slide. We see Elliot. Next slide. So research methods matter. In the 4 colored balls are through both practice and our R&D on research, are 4 of the methods that we have found are the most conducive to ensuring community input, inclusion, democratizing research. So networked improvement communities, data feedback loops, continuous improvement, inclusive innovation. We've used these in each of these 3 projects, and then finally the Demo Lab R&D project that we did with partners and GLC, where we learned a whole lot about the field and how you need to build in appropriate time, appropriate feedback loops, appropriate kind of language sharing opportunities in order to really be able to build the kind of research approach that ultimately we'll get better results. We'll get more uptake. We'll have better spread because you have had part of the process throughout. I was going to share one example, but watching the time, I'm going to kick it back to Eric to take us home.
30 seconds. 2 key components of the research collaborative is to make sure that it's not researchers talking to researchers. So we bring in youth. Youth voices, youth leadership, youth research, and we provide structures, events, platforms, scaffolds, and mentoring to support a set of youth who are in Providence, Rhode Island, the Youth Action Researchers at the Intersection. That project is reaching its culmination in the next 2 months, and we look forward to sharing the outputs of that. And then our Distinguished Fellows. Our students at the Center Distinguished Fellows are 5 building or classroom level leaders who are experienced in implementing student-centered practices to produce equity. They help us orient the conversation to practice and to policy so we don't get located in the ephemera of research too much. And it's been a key component of the research collaborative all along.
Eric and Rebecca, thank you so much. And your session and the ones that have gone before today are so rich, both in helping us understand how to do what we're doing out in the field, but also so helpful in terms of how to think about it and prepare ourselves for it. So that's great, and really appreciate all the work you're doing.